Clovis I can be considered the first king of both France and Germany. But how can a king be considered the first of two different nations, especially two different nations that would not appear for many centuries? Well, let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Brandon Foster, and I am a Germanic historian, primarily focusing on the early medieval period from tribe to empire. So Clovis was born in the 5th century in what is known as Frankia. Now, Frankia was a place that used to be called Gaul, but at one point transitioned from Gaul to Frankia. Now, this transition happened after the Roman conquest of Gaul in the 1st century BC by Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar campaigned in Gaul before he did the whole trying to create an empire thing. And while he was in Gaul, he was there for about 9 years, he wrote letters back to Rome, kind of boasting about what he was doing. And eventually he would take all these writings and he would make the commentaries on the Gallic War. So we know a decent amount about the Gauls because he was there. And that the Gauls were a Celtic group or a Celtic collection of different tribes. And as Rome conquered them, they did the next natural thing, which is to then settle. So eventually Gaul would go from being a primarily Celtic population to what they started calling a Gallo-Roman population. And this would be a mix of the Celtic languages and then the Roman languages on top of that. Now, eventually, during the 1st century AD, so a century later, the Germanic tribes started to come in. And we are told about them by Tacitus. Tacitus never actually went to Germania, which is what they called the place where the Germans were. The IA means kind of the place of. It's also where we get the India, which is the place of the Indus River, or beyond the Indus River as well. And that's also where Frankia gets its name, the land of the Franks. And we are told by Tacitus that these Germans started coming in, these Germanic tribes, and they would start settling near the Danube, and then they would slowly come over. Eventually, as time went on and the centuries passed, the whole area of Gaul, and slightly north of Gaul as well, would be inhabited and conquered by the Germanic tribes. And eventually, a collection of them would form a confederacy, and they would call that the Franks. And their home, naturally, was Frankia. So these Franks, they were known for kind of being very warlike, their name means bold and fierce, is what historians believe. And so these Franks kind of started mixing with the Gallo-Romans. And this is where we get the mixture today of the French and the Germans. So at first, they were a collection of tribes, just like their Gallic neighbors were before the Romans. Then, a certain individual by the name of Clovis, who we call Clovis I, came in and he decided that he did not want to be a regional lord anymore. His father was a regional lord and his grandfather was a regional lord, at least as far as we know. There aren't a lot of writings about them. There's more writings about Clovis on, and then the amount of writings that happen about the Franks kind of explode around Charlemagne multiple centuries later. But we'll get to him in a minute. So Clovis I decided that he didn't want to be a regional lord, and he wanted to unite all the different Frankish tribes. At this time, there are multiple different areas. We have Neustria, Austrasia, Bavaria. These are three of the primary areas that would kind of be passed up to different sons as kings would pass away. So he united all of the different tribes, and he started, he campaigned against some, he allied with others, and eventually, in the 490s, we started this around the 480s, in the 490s, he decided that he was going to convert to Christianity. Now, the reason why he did this was very Constantinian of him. He was about to go into battle, and as most kings in the ancient world did, and the medieval world, he prayed. And he, for some reason, primarily because of the influence of his wife, but there might have been other reasons as well, he was influenced to pray to the Christian God. And so he did. And he went to battle, and just like Constantine I, he won. So he converted to Christianity. Now, he could have converted to either Arianism or Catholicism, and he chose Catholicism, again, probably because of his wife. And this would cement the Frankish nation into the Christian sphere of the Roman world. Now, fast forward a few centuries, Clovis I has done his thing. He died shortly into the 5th century, 511 or so is what we believe. He ruled about 30 years, and he started at about 15. So he was a young king, and he died very young as well, which was more common back then. So fast forward a few centuries, the Merovingian dynasty, which is what Clovis started, and it was named, we think, after probably his grandfather. Again, we know very little. And so the Merovingian dynasty progresses, and eventually it is replaced by the Carolingian dynasty. Now, the Carolingians were first started by Pepin the Short, and he took over the throne, and then his son, Charlemagne, would be the pinnacle, the peak of the Carolingian dynasty. He was the greatest Frankish king that we know of. He had the most writings, did the most things. He made the Carolingian, or the Frankish nation the powerhouse that it would become and slowly dwindle from. So he did his thing, and then his son, Louis the Pious, had some more trouble. Charlemagne expanded the borders to the greatest point they would be in, and then his son took over, and then he had trouble with his sons. And this is kind of the climax of our story that happened between the three sons of Louis the Pious. Louis the Pious had passed away 3 years before, and in good Germanic fashion, he had divvied up his nation into his three sons. And you had Charles, Louis, and Pepin, I believe it was. Those were the most common names for the children of kings in the Frankish nation. And they had a little battle, and eventually two of them would fight against one, and they would win. But this also caused the fracture of the Frankish kingdom. The western half would become Frankia, and the eastern half would become the Teutonic lands. So Frankia would eventually become France. It is the majority of France as we know it today. And the Teutonic side would become modern-day Germany. Now, France would not fully become France until Hugh Capet about a century later, and then Germany wouldn't become a united Germanic land until after Napoleon in the 1860s. But both kings, Hugh Capet and the Kaisership in Germany centuries later, can both trace their lines all the way back to Clovis I. Not genetically, they weren't one broken kingship, but they can do the title of their crown all the way back to Clovis I. And that is how we can say that Clovis I was the first king of both France and Germany. Now, if you like Germanic history, French history, German history, European history maybe, then this is the channel for you. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all the things, whatever you want to do. Thanks and peace.